You stand in the heat of a dusty Syrian encampment, your tiny sandals kicking up gravel as armored giants tower over you. Your tunic itches, your helmet wobbles, but when the legion roars your name, little boots, you lift your arms like a true general. You are 6 years old, and somewhere behind the cheers, your father is dying, and Rome is already planning your destruction. Before we dive deeper into the shadows of power and pain, take a moment to tell me where in the world you're watching from. It never ceases to amaze me how history binds us across borders, time zones, and languages. If you're fascinated by the forgotten truths of the ancient world, consider subscribing and hitting that like button. It helps us keep unearthing these stories together from every corner of the globe. In 12 CE, he was born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, but history would remember him by the nickname given by soldiers, Caligula, Little Boots. He was the golden child of the Roman Empire, blonde, bright-eyed, draped in the prestige of two of Rome's most beloved bloodlines. His father, Germanicus, was a war hero celebrated by both the legions and the people. His mother, Agrippina the Elder, was the granddaughter of Augustus himself. If Rome could be said to have royalty, Caligula was born in its gilded cradle. But beneath the marble floors of Rome's grandeur, the foundations were already cracking. The imperial court was not a family. It was a cage full of lions, and the closer you were to power, the more certain your doom. Germanicus died when Caligula was just 7. Officially, it was illness. Unofficially, whispers of poison drifted from the east to the Palatine Hill. Many believed Emperor Tiberius had orchestrated it. Germanicus had grown too popular, and in Rome, popularity was often a prelude to assassination. Caligula's grief was not afforded the dignity of silence. His father's ashes were carried back from Antioch in an urn held by Agrippina as she walked barefoot across Italy, weeping openly in a display both of mourning and defiance. Rome mourned too, publicly, passionately. But the message behind the mourning was not lost on those who paid attention. If Germanicus could die, anyone could. After Germanicus's death, the killings began. Caligula's mother Agrippina was exiled by Tiberius, accused of plotting treason. His older brothers, Nero and Drusus, were imprisoned and slowly starved to death. One, it's said, chewed his own mattress in hunger. The young Caligula watched as his family tree was pruned with surgical precision, one branch at a time. By the time he was 8, he was essentially an orphan in everything but name, alone, yet not forgotten. Tiberius summoned him to live on the island of Capri. Most children imagine islands as paradise. Capri was a palace of paranoia, a place where the emperor surrounded himself with astrologers, executioners, and boys taught to call him Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Caligula arrived, smiling. He had learned already that in Rome, masks were more important than faces. In the words of the historian Suetonius, he never said or did anything except to win Tiberius's favor. He called the man who had destroyed his family grandfather. He learned to flatter, to entertain, to betray nothing. One night, Tiberius reportedly turned to his confidants and said, "This boy will be a serpent to the people of Rome, and a Phaethon to the world." A reference to the reckless son of the sun god who nearly burned the earth by driving the chariot of the sun. Caligula, in other words, was destined not to rule, but to consume. What does a child become when love is devoured by fear? When survival depends on obedience to the very man who murdered your blood? On Capri, Caligula was kept alive not because he was loved, but because he was useful, a symbol, a pawn. And yet, he learned to play the game. He watched as men bowed to power they hated. He saw that laws meant nothing without teeth, and he discovered the first truth that would define his rule. In Rome, the gods were not in temples, they wore crowns. In 37 CE, Tiberius died. Some say naturally, others claim he was smothered with a pillow. Either way, it was Caligula who emerged from the shadows of Capri and stepped into the light of empire. At just 24, he was hailed as a savior. Rome, weary of Tiberius's cold rule, exploded in joy. Senators wept. Crowds shouted that a new golden age had begun. Coins were minted with Caligula's face. Statues were raised. Prisoners were freed. Games were thrown in his honor. But no one knew who he truly was. They were cheering for Little Boots, the adorable boy they remembered, not the man who had learned that cruelty could be a currency, and that the dead don't talk back. For 7 months he played the part of the benevolent emperor, generous, charming, respectful of Senate traditions. But beneath the smile, something was growing, a hunger not just for power, but for domination. The child who had watched his family be broken was now in control of the very machine that had broken them. What would he do with it? The answer would not come all at once. It would come slowly, in the silence of his chambers, in the eyes of the slaves who feared his footsteps, in the laughter that echoed through marble halls late into the night, and in the whisper that began to spread through Rome like smoke before a fire. The boy who survived the emperors has become something far worse. The moon hung over Palatine Hill like a silver coin dropped into a black well, casting long shadows across the marble courtyard. Inside, torchlight flickered across the golden walls of the imperial palace. The guests arrived in silence. Senators, generals, wives, widows, each face painted with false smiles, each footstep sounding like a funeral drum. The doors closed behind them with a low groan. No one tried to leave. In 37 CE, Caligula had risen like a god reborn, young, charismatic, and welcomed as the son of Rome's favorite general. But only months into his reign, something cracked. Perhaps it was the mysterious illness that nearly killed him that autumn, the fever that kept him bedridden for weeks. Some claimed it was brain damage. Others said the sickness stripped away the last of his humanity. Whatever the cause, what emerged from that sickbed was not the man Rome had celebrated. It was something else, something that believed the throne was not merely above the law, it was the law. What happens when absolute power sheds its mask? At first, the changes were subtle. The emperor's temper grew sharper, his orders stranger. Horses promoted to senatorial ranks. Statues of gods decapitated and replaced with Caligula's likeness. But these were only symptoms. The true sickness lay deeper, in the private halls of the palace where power and pleasure became indistinguishable, and fear was the most potent wine served. Guests were summoned to the imperial palace under the pretense of diplomacy, celebration, or religious observance. Some believed they were being honored, others knew better. Word had already begun to spread of Caligula's private feasts, nightmares clothed in luxury. According to Roman historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio, these gatherings unfolded like scenes from a fever dream. Imagine a hall where every column is gilded, every goblet carved from gemstone, and every eye watching you is pretending not to tremble. The emperor would arrive late, always dramatic, draped in silks, perfumed, and grinning like a child with a secret no one wanted to hear. One night, he entered the hall in the robes of Jupiter himself, crowned, scepter in hand. "Tonight," he declared, "you dine with a god." No one laughed. The meal began normally, sumptuous food, fine wine, but the air was different. Guests ate carefully, each mouthful a performance. Caligula paced behind them, fingers trailing across shoulders, whispering into ears. Sometimes he would call a senator's wife away from the table, escort her into another room, and return alone minutes later. Sometimes he would call the husband, and when he returned, he looked older, smaller. What had happened behind those doors? No one dared ask. At one feast, a young noblewoman began to cry silently into her wine. Caligula stopped the music and walked to her, lifting her chin with a single finger. "Do you not love your emperor?" he asked gently. She nodded, barely breathing. "Then smile." And she did, because the alternative was unthinkable. These were not merely parties. They were tests, performances, games designed to humiliate the powerful and break the proud. Once he ordered the high priest of Jupiter to perform a dance in front of the Senate, spinning like a court jester as the elite tried to pretend it was amusing. On another occasion, he offered a senator's daughter as a door prize to a visiting dignitary, laughing as the man turned pale. But not every horror was hidden behind velvet curtains. In one infamous incident, Caligula stood before a group of assembled nobles and announced that he had the power to do anything to anyone at any time. To prove it, he pointed to a man in the crowd, Lucius Cassius Longinus, an aged and respected senator, and ordered him to be executed immediately. No trial, no explanation. Guards dragged him out screaming. His only crime was being visible in that moment. And yet, through it all, the Senate applauded. The audience smiled. The empire pretended nothing was wrong, because the first rule of surviving Caligula's Rome was simple: never break character. Behind closed doors, darker tales spread among slaves and servants, stories of young boys and girls plucked from their homes to serve at the emperor's whim, of men forced into obscene performances, of women who disappeared after being seen entering his chamber, never to be mentioned again. These stories were unconfirmed, whispered, and impossible to prove, but they were believed, and in time, belief was all that mattered. Even the walls seemed to whisper in fear. Caligula's power was no longer political, it was total. He ruled bodies, minds, reputations. His palace had become a theater of submission, where every gesture was watched, every breath a potential offense. Rome's elite, once proud rulers of the Republic, had become his chorus line, ornaments in a grotesque masquerade. But no mask can be worn forever. In the deepening shadow of his madness, a question began to spread in the hearts of Rome's most dangerous men, those who had once bowed the lowest. What happens when the god stops being feared? And, more importantly, who dares remind him that he's mortal? By the end, the only ones Caligula trusted were statues, and even they weren't safe. They stood frozen in the palace courtyard, their carved marble eyes forever open, unable to blink at the horrors unfolding beneath them. One by one, their faces were defaced, replaced with Caligula's own. Not even the gods could remain themselves in a world where the emperor believed he was one. Thank you for exploring this haunting chapter of Roman history with me. I'd love to know, where are you watching from? The idea that people across the globe, in different languages and cultures, are connected through curiosity about the past is incredible. If you're enjoying this journey through history's darker corridors, consider subscribing and liking the video. It helps bring these stories to more people, and lets us continue digging into the truths empires tried to bury. By 39 CE, the Roman world had fallen into a quiet dread. Senators no longer debated, they performed. Generals gave speeches like men offering confessions. Slaves moved silently through halls that once rang with laughter. The palace no longer ruled Rome. It was Rome. And inside its walls, one man believed himself eternal. Caligula no longer referred to himself as emperor. He called himself a god. Not in metaphor, not in theater, in marble, in law, in blood. He appeared in public dressed as Apollo, then as Mercury, then as Jupiter himself. Temples were built in his name. Statues of Zeus were dragged from Greece and their heads replaced with his own likeness, chiseled with fanatical precision. He ordered worship and sacrifices to himself from east to west. Divinity, not as honor, but as enforcement. When senators hesitated to call him divine, he reminded them gently, "I can have your tongues torn out and fed to dogs." And they believed him, because by then he had already done worse. He declared that even the gods had grown jealous of him. He would speak to them aloud in the palace, berating them, mocking them. When thunder cracked across the city, Caligula would scream insults into the storm, daring Jupiter to strike him down. "Come now," he once reportedly bellowed from his balcony, arms raised, "I stand before you unguarded. I am ready." The sky stayed silent, and so the executions continued. His uncle, Claudius, once considered harmless, was spared only because Caligula thought him amusing. "That stammering fool," he laughed, "makes the gods laugh with me." But others were not so lucky. Governors were recalled and beheaded without trial. Senators invited to dinner vanished by morning. Even his most trusted guards found themselves accused, tortured, discarded. Caligula had learned the truth that all tyrants eventually find. If no one is innocent, then no one can be trusted. He began speaking only to statues, consulting with them, laughing with them, whispering to them. He grew suspicious of even silence. Once, when his favorite actress died suddenly, he ordered her body exhumed, just to make sure it wasn't a trick. When one guard failed to laugh at a joke, Caligula had his tongue nailed to a board. The line between victim and conspirator dissolved completely, and somewhere in the rot of fear, the seed of rebellion took root. There were whispers first, then nods, then meetings in private homes with doors double-bolted. It was not the senators who moved first. They were too afraid. It was the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own protectors, men who had seen too much, who had followed him into too many chambers, carried out too many orders, watched too many weep in silence. One man among them, Cassius Chaerea, had been mocked one too many times. Caligula had taken to calling him girl, jeering at his soft voice, ordering him to use obscene signals when requesting a watch change. But Chaerea had not forgotten who he was, a veteran, a Roman, and a man with a sword. The plan was simple. A distraction during the games, a passageway, narrow and isolated, and a dagger drawn in the name of a republic long dead. On the morning of January 24th, 41 CE, Caligula rose as usual. He dressed not as a man, but as a god, preparing to attend the Palatine Games, his own invention, honoring himself. The sun glittered across the marble as he walked through the underground corridor linking the theater to the palace. It was there, in the shadows of a tunnel he himself had built, that they struck. Chaerea was the first. His blade pierced Caligula's neck with surgical rage. Others followed. By the time it was done, the emperor's body lay twisted on the stone floor, a golden sash soaked in red, eyes wide in disbelief. The god had bled. But even then, Rome did not breathe easy. The assassins rushed to restore the Senate's power, declaring the empire dead and the republic restored. But the people, traumatized and confused, did not cheer. They remembered the games, the festivals, the food, the spectacle. Some even mourned him. And in the vacuum left by Caligula's collapse, there was no rebirth of liberty, only a new name, hurriedly plucked from the bloodline. The stammering uncle Claudius, once laughed at, was found trembling behind a curtain and crowned before nightfall. Caligula had died, but the machinery he built, the worship, the fear, the silence, remained intact. Rome had not escaped the monster. It had learned to live with him, and perhaps, deep down, it always would.